welcome to the 500 workshop. Today we're going to be talking about end float. So here we have a 650cc block and we were rebuilding this, and the reason why we were rebuilding it was because that it had low oil pressure when the oil got very warm, and the cause of that was the journals on the crankshaft, which were too small for the bearings, so they'd obviously worn down and been ground, and then standard bearings fitted. So we bought a new crank, new bearings all round. We put it all together. Everything was good. We put it in, we started it up. It started for about 20 seconds, all was looking good, and then it stopped, and then we found the engine was seized. Now, the reason why the engine seized was a bit of a mystery, and so I had to re-strip the whole engine back, take it out the car, take it apart. We found the head was fine, the timing chain was fine, so these were the areas where I was worried. We also found the pistons were fine, the piston rings. Literally got the the crankcase down to its bare minimum with just the crankshaft and the two bearings remaining. I undid the bearings and tried to turn the crank, and that's when the crank could turn once the bearings were undone, but it turned and left the backside bearing in place, but the front side bearing turned with the crank, so it become fused onto the crankshaft. Now that took a lot of persuasion with a hammer to remove it, with a persuader and some leverage. Eventually got it off, and luckily there was no damage to the crank itself. I think that's because it had run so little. So once I had it all apart, I took it to Nathan at Classic Car Solutions in Harpenden, and we took a look, and the bearing had indeed kind of swelled up from the heat. So that bearing wasn't really fit for purpose anymore. Luckily, Nathan's in the process of helping someone else rebuild theirs. And so we had a spare bearing there, and we did some measurements and tried to understand what was going on. And it seems, because this is a new crank, the end of this point of the crank here was 3/1000 of an inch too wide to not allow any end float. Now, end float is a very small margin of play, which allows the bearing to kind of, within a kind of couple of hairs, be able to have a little play, so when it warms up it doesn't stick and get stuck exactly as it has in this position. So it's not something I checked. It's something I probably should have checked but didn't when I was rebuilding the engine.
End float is the gap between the bearing and the crankshaft at each of these 2 points. So it is the actual face of the bearing against the actual face of the journals of the crankshaft at these points. It allows for a minute lateral movement of the crankshaft to ensure that as the engine heats up and the mechanical parts heat up, they do not seize, as we found in this case.
And we had two options. Probably the better and right way to do it would be to send the crank off and have it re-engineered by someone to take that margin off. But that takes time and effort and money. And the quicker thing, and something Nathan could do for me, was to take a little bit off the bearing face, so the side of the bearing face. So that's what we've done. So this bearing is literally 3/1000 of an inch less wide than it was, and now that allows us to move our crank. So we have actually replaced the bearing with a new one as well. Didn't want to reuse the one that had got stuck. Nathan has made it good, so if I ever need to use it I can, but his recommendation was replace it, so that's what we've done. And now we need to put the whole engine back together again, put it in, and hope it starts this time and continues to run.